Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody, Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. And I am Gary Michuta, your host and sensei for this hour. We are going to dive into, how should we explain, defend the faith with clarity, charity, and confidence. And that means sharing, defending the faith in conversation. And especially nowadays, there are so many unbelievers out there. That conversation can be tough because they will throw out all sorts of slogans, like "There's no existence for no evidence for the existence of God," or "I don't believe in God, I believe in science," or "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." These slogans, these kind of cliche type thinking, can often knock us off our game. And are you prepared to be able to give a reasoned defense for the hope that's in you? Well, our guest today is John DeRosa, and he's going to be coming up on the other side of the break. And John just finished a remarkable book that's going to be published by Catholic Answers Press. I believe, we'll find out from John, but I believe it's going to be near the end of May it's going to come out. And it's called One More God Than You, answering atheistic slogans. And so we're going to take on some of those slogans today, and John's going to teach us how to reason beyond it and actually help the other person see not only the problems with the slogans, but the problems with his position that God doesn't exist. So that's going to be a lot of fun. John's a great guy. We've had him on a few times on the program, and like I said, I'm super excited about this book because this is one of those books that we actually needed a couple years ago. Thank God it's coming out now, but we need to get our hands on it, learn it, love it, and use it because, we got to stop this kind of meme thinking, slogan thinking, cliche thinking, and really get down to brass tacks where reality is, because it's only there you find the Lord of reality, who is God himself. So he's going to be coming up on the other side of the break. As always, we have our critical thinking skills portion of the program called Finding the Fallacy, in which we take on an informal fallacy, kind of look into it, how to diffuse it. Today's Finding the Fallacy, by the way, is called Poisoning the Well. And we also meet an early church father. And, this is a really cool series. I love meeting the early church fathers because you never know what to expect. Sometimes it's a very famous saint that everybody knows about. Many times it's obscure saints or just ordinary early Christians who wrote that we know practically nothing about. And sometimes we have early church fathers like today who really isn't an early church father as much as an early church epitaph. In other words, we have an inscription on a tomb marker as an early church father, and that is the epitaph of Abercius. So we're going to look at that. I might be able to actually read the entire inscription. It's not that long. But, it's fascinating. Catholicism's such an awesome religion. That's all I can say. Not only do we look at these early church writings and pay close attention and honor them, but, many times those writings are sometimes written on grave markers. So, nevertheless, it does witness to the early church's beliefs and faith, and that's why it's important. All right, well, hey, before we begin, I want to give my shout-outs and welcome all of you watching live stream on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody. Great to have you on board. I also want to welcome all of you listening on radio stations around the United States and also around the world via podcast. And again, as always, I always try to focus you on the website because that you can actually access all the hands-on apologetic programs there at virginmostpowerfulradio.org. And just go up to our shows, click on Hands-on Apologetics, or really any of the great shows that Virgin Most Powerful produces. And bang, you got all the information there. And from there, you can do what I call apologetics in place. You can share, pass on the information. Maybe there's a program that somebody's struggling with and it happened to be the topic for that day. Send them a link, pass the word around. And by the way, folks, don't forget to do all those awesome apologetic in place social media type goodies. Really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed, please do. The Hands-on Apologetics on YouTube, or thumbs up, whatever you do there in social media land. You guys could probably tell me more than I could tell you because I'm not super tech savvy. I'm always learning. Let's see. If you have a question, by the way, for John DeRosa on the other side of the break, you can always give us a call at 888-526-2151. It's 888-526-2151, or perhaps you would rather send an email, and that's usually the route I would do. I'd much rather prefer to send an email than go live. But if you want to send an email, send it to questions@handsonapologetics.com. It's all one word. That is the official Dojo mailbox. And yes, I do get mail. Yes, I do answer the mail. Not always in a timely fashion. But you know what? The mail's not in a timely fashion today either. So, it is immediate response, about as far as immediate as I can get. All right, so without further ado, why don't we jump to the Finding the Fallacy for today. Today's Finding the Fallacy is the poisoning of the well. The poisoning of the well. I'm not sure. I should have looked this up before the show, but somewhere deep in my memory, I believe poisoning the well is actually a phrase that was coined by St. Henry John Newman. If I remember correctly, Newman, in a debate, used the poisoning of the well to smoke out his opponent who was using this fallacy. What is poisoning the well? Well, let me give you the technical example, and then I'll give you some illustrations of how it works, because often the definition doesn't make a lot of sense. Poisoning the well is a type of informal fallacy where irrelevant adverse information about a target is preemptively presented to an audience with the intention of discrediting or ridiculing something that the targeted person is about to say. That's an okay definition. Basically, what poisoning the well is a means in which you can render a person's claim unfalsifiable. And that is done by basically painting or describing the only source in which somebody could refute a claim as being illegitimate. Maybe that's, at least to my mind, that's a little clearer. For example, I believe the example maybe from Newman may have been that somebody claimed that Catholic priests are trained in seminary to always lie. And, of course, Newman, of course, objected that seminaries do no such thing. In fact, they teach that you should always tell the truth, to which his opponent said, what else would you expect a lying Catholic priest to say? Right? So, in a sense, he poisoned the well because the only way Newman could refute the argument would be to dip into that well that has been poisoned, namely calling that everything that comes from seminary is a lie. You could use that for other situations as well. But essentially what it is it's impossible to falsify such a claim. Here's a simple example. I'm not quite sure it's perfectly poisoning the well, but it's something that occurs. Picture two kids that are arguing, and one of the kids comes up to you and says, Johnny is always arguing with me. And Johnny says, no, I'm not. And then the answer is, well, see, there he goes again. He's arguing. Well, of course, Johnny can't say anything to contradict it, because if he does, he actually affirms it. So I think, in a sense, that kind of poisons the well. I mean, what could you say if you're Johnny? Because if you acquiesce and say, yes, I always start arguments, then you're guilty that way. And if you deny it, since the well's poisoned, well, there you go. You kind of affirm it. So that's our finding the fallacy for today, the poisoning of the well. Let's go to Meet the Early Church Father. Like I said, it's a really cool one. It's the Epitaph of Abercius. I think that's how you pronounce him. Abercius, probably is another way. Which was inscribed around AD 180 or 200. Abercius is probably a better way. Abercius, the composer of his own epitaph, was the bishop of Hierapolis in Phrygia, Solitaris. The two fragments of the epitaph, by the way, an epitaph is basically a grave marker, is known in the Lateran Museum in Rome, and it was discovered near Hierapolis in 1883 by the Scottish archaeologist William Ramsay. The same archaeologist had discovered a year earlier an epitaph from a certain Alexander, which was in the same style imitated of Abercius, and which unfortunately bore a date convertible to 216 A.D. So we know chances are this current epitaph had to come before that. So it's a very early writing indeed. With the aid of the epitaph of Alexander and a 4th century biography of Abercius, it has been possible to reconstruct the complete text of the epitaph, although only about 20% of the text is contained on the two fragments. So that's very fortunate indeed. So why don't we really quickly, we could probably read it. A citizen of a prominent city, I erected this. While I lived, that I might have a resting place for my body. Abercius is my name, a disciple of the chaste shepherd, who feeds the sheep on the mountains and in the fields, who has great eyes surveying everywhere, who taught me to be faithful writing of life. And we'll have to stop there. I hear the music. Coming up next, John DeRosa. Stay tuned, folks.
Jesus said in Luke 17, "When you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, 'We are unprofitable servants. We have only done our duty.'" According to St. John of the Cross, God is pleased with the little deeds we do in secret. He takes more pleasure in these than in a multitude of grand works that we may do out of the desire to be seen by others. May God help us to do the things that please Him, and not just to appear great in the eyes of others.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is? Will it be a boy? Or will it be a girl?
We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor?
Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Marianne Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2727. 2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands-On Apologetics. I feel bad. Let me finish that quote from the Epitaph of Abercius just really quick, because I didn't want to just leave right in the middle when all the good stuff actually occurs in the Epitaph. He sent me to Rome to contemplate a kingdom and to behold a queen in a golden robe and golden sandals. There I saw people who had the resplendent seal, and as I saw the plain of Syria and all the cities, even Nisbis, beyond the Euphrates, and everywhere I had associates, having Paul as a companion. Everywhere faith led the way, and everywhere set before me food, fish from a fountain, mighty and pure, which a chaste virgin caught, and gave this to my friends to eat always, having good wine, given mixed wine with bread. And standing by, I, Abercius, ordered this to be inscribed. And we'll just stop it right there, but I wanted to finish that quote. Don't want to leave our fans for meet the early church father hanging. And but anyway, let's shift gears now to talking with non-believers and encountering many of these slogans that I gave at the beginning of the hour. How do you answer them? Well, our good friend John DeRosa has done us a great favor. He's writing a book that's soon to be released, which tackles these slogans. As you know, John DeRosa's undergraduate degree in math education at the College of New Jersey and MA in Pure and Applied Mathematics at Montclair State University. He runs an incredible website that, if you haven't checked it out, folks, especially if you're interested in theistic apologetics, you got to check it out. It's called classicaltheism.com. And the name of his upcoming book is One Less God Than You. And John DeRosa, welcome back to Hands-On Apologetics.
Thank you, Gary. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm a big fan of the show, and it's always great to be on.
Well, thanks, John. And we're a big fan of you as well, because you've been just doing outstanding work on your Classical Theism website. Just great interviews. I'm constantly going on it and filling in a lot of areas where, quite frankly, like I never completely considered, in regards to grappling with questions of the existence of God.
I'm glad you enjoy it. No, that's honestly that a lot of the questions I may not have even considered either. The whole premise of the show is I'm going to bring on some of these great experts in philosophy, in history, in theology, and they're going to help teach us and give us, the nuggets, the important information that we need so we can go out there and defend Catholic Christian ideas in conversation. So I'm learning along with you and with all the rest of the listeners.
Yeah. And, I got to ask you, John, you're such a mild-mannered guy. You have such a smooth, radio-friendly voice. When you're talking with non-believers, do you keep your cool like you do on the podcast?
It's a great question. No, I mean, I struggle just like everybody else. I'll tell you what, especially because the whole premise of what got me into this book was when I was talking at a confirmation retreat in a small group, and a lot of the ninth graders are spouting slogans. So imagine this. It's tough enough. I will say I struggle just like everybody else, to keep your cool, to just calmly respond. But if you can train yourself to do it, if you keep practicing it, just focus on the truth, ask questions. I give you a lot of tips to do it. You can get better at it. But imagine me, I'm like, oh man, I've studied this stuff. And then all of a sudden there's these like hotshot 8th grade, 9th graders that are like, no, I know so much more than you. And like, it's so tempting to want to just be like, no, I know so much more than you. And that's not what it's all about. And same thing with family gatherings. And you guys have talked about that on the show before. Often the most difficult folks to evangelize are people within your own family, because they know all your own flaws. It's so easy to get into an argument with your brother, with your sister, aunts and uncles, and so forth. So I struggle just like everybody else when it comes to keeping cool in conversation. But I truly believe if you have in your mind beforehand some of the important principles, like you're going to pray every day and you're going to focus on asking questions, just those two things: pray every day, talk to God, ask questions, rather than trying to make a ton of statements. If you can remember those two things, that'll automatically just bring down the tone, the level of pressure, and you'll be able to have more productive conversations. And at the very least, you can approach the conversation, even if you don't know what to say, even if you think, you had a terrible one, which, trust me, I've had many. You can just, at least come away with the fact that, I found out some new areas where I need to study, where I need to look at this objection, and perhaps you were able to offer something more for the person's consideration. But no, I struggle just like everybody else when it comes to keeping your cool.
Yeah. So, hey, let's talk a little bit about your upcoming book. It's from Catholic Answers Press. It's called One Less God Than You. Do you know when it's going to be released?
Yeah, good question. So this is my first book. I'm learning the ins and outs of this. I thought it was going to be like end of April, but it got pushed back a little bit. So it should be by middle of May. You can pre-order it now, though. So it's available on Catholic.com, or you can go to classicaltheism.com/new book, and you can pre-order it. But it should be available hopefully by around the middle of May.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, this, like I said before I introduced you, this is one of those books that really, I think, needed to be published like a couple years ago, because it's so needed, and there's this niche that hasn't been filled because, we get bombarded not by arguments so much as slogans, and in this book you tackle many of the biggies, the most
Well,
common
and that's
ones.
kind of what I wanted to do, is just
Yeah.
equip the regular folks, the people who are going to be in confirmation classes, the people who are going to be having conversations with their friends at a poker game or at Starbucks and so forth. And what I try to do is, like, there's 20 slogans, and I always like to give the nod to Gary Machuda, who encouraged me to compile this into a full-length book, because it was originally just an ebook and it was shorter. I try to take some of the good apologetics being done by people like Trent Horn and Dr. Edward Fazer and Brant Petrie and all, these great Catholics are doing great apologetic stuff, but can we boil it down into some concise answers that can get the conversation going for 20 of these slogans that you're likely to hear at least a few of them if you have conversations with unbelievers. And so I want this book to serve people and help the regular Catholic who, maybe they haven't studied this stuff for years, but they just want to be able to offer something and have a decent answer kind of prepared the next time they get into a conversation. So I'm happy to talk about any of the slogans, and I hope it keeps going. Maybe after I publish this one, I'll just keep track of adding some more that come up, and there could be, who knows, a plus edition in the future.
Oh, I'm sure there are, because that's kind of been the meat and potatoes of the new atheism, has been not so much, intricate arguments as much as memes and slogans.
Well, can I tell you a new thought I had today? This isn't in the book,
Yep.
but I just had a thought about this, because what the new atheism did so well, and I think it's actually kind of on the way out. It's been on the way out because just a ton of stuff happened and shifts and cultural emphases and things. But when it got really popular, it did a great job. And Pat Flynn pointed this out when he was on your show, of really degrading Christianity and showing people, like telling people it doesn't have any value for you. It's evil. It's like slavery. It's like superstition. It's horrible. You would never want to be a part of this. And you're finding the fallacy for today, poisoning the well. I think they did a really good job of doing that. And so what do we do in response? One of the things we got to do, I talk about this as a small tip, not in these words, but for when we're presenting evidence, we got to be able to show the beauty and the value of Christianity. And I'll tell you, we're going to get into these slogans in a second, but Bishop Barron had a dialogue with Dr. William Lane Craig. People might have heard this a couple of years ago. It was a really cool dialogue on apologetics. And Dr. Craig asked Bishop Barron, like, what was he getting at with this business of beauty? Do you really think you're going to bring people to Christianity through beauty? Like, someone looks at a nice building and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I guess, I'll become a Christian. And that's kind of how Craig kind of posed the question in that vein. I was like, that's kind of a good point. What is he getting at with beauty? What I'm getting at, what I've come to see more and more, is part of our apologetic needs to provide the beauty and the value of Christianity in addition to the truth. Like, it's true, and we have good evidence to support it, but because it's true, it's also beautiful. It's also the idea that you, every individual, is being given grace by God to be drawn into a relationship with him so that you might come to know him, to know yourself fully, and enjoy him forever. And that is a beautiful and good thing. And I think that needs to be said more often, because they've done a great job of poisoning the well and saying, you don't need Christianity. No, I think not only do you need it, I think it's something that everyone should be after. And we got to present that as part of our case. And then, that can lead into, well, since it's so valuable, since it's so beautiful, that can also lead into Pascal's wager, or a modern version of it, that since it's such a great good that you could uncover, shouldn't you want to kind of lean into that a little bit? Shouldn't you be willing to seek that a bit? And perhaps we can talk more about the details, but I just wanted to get that preliminary point out there, because the new atheists, they did a good job of poisoning the well, but we got to push back, show the beauty, the value of Christianity, and then also present some good arguments and evidence.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. In fact, right before the show, it occurred to me, I guess it's been around, but just recently I encountered it. It was the slogan that if you destroyed all books, religious books and science books, and what do you expect would come back? In a couple of years you would have the science books come back, but not the religious books. And the whole premise behind that is, religion doesn't do anything. It's of no value. There's lots of underlying tones packed into that slogan, isn't there?
Absolutely. No, and that's in the miscellaneous section, because I heard that, I think, on an interview. Ricky Gervais used that with Stephen Colbert in a famous interview. And he said, well, listen, if we burned all the science and religious books, the science books would come back the same, after 1,000 years. But those religious books, they would just be gone. And that's, I guess it's supposed to show the value. But if someone kind of said that to me, the first question I would ask, and it's, on the show, the audience claps and they're like, whoa, what a great point. But I would just ask, well, okay, that's interesting. What exactly is that supposed to show? What exactly is the point of that little thought experiment? And so that'd be like my first question. Let them tell us a little bit more, because to me, I'm like, I don't really know what it's supposed to show. And then the real counter to it. So after you ask that first question, you can ask them, okay, well, what if we burned all the ancient history books and extant manuscripts from long ago? They wouldn't be able to come back the same. Would that mean there's no such thing as ancient history? And once you think about it a bit, obviously that doesn't follow. So some process or some, slogan that can disprove all of history in addition to religion, obviously isn't worthwhile. And so that's kind of like a little reductio ad absurdum. If someone says that to you, first you ask them, well, what exactly is it supposed to show? And then say, well, hey, wouldn't this destroy all of history? Just because the history books couldn't come back the same, that doesn't mean they're not true. We believe things happened in the past. So it's one of those, fun, gets the crowd going type slogans, but I don't think it has any philosophical or important force behind it.
No, in fact, from what I've learned, especially through Stanley Yaki, it's like, I'm not so sure. I mean, sure, like mathematics would come back stuff, but, we might have discoveries, but a full-blown modern, science, I don't know if it would.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yaki's a great writer. I got to read more of, but he, because I know he influenced Stacey Trasancos, who you've had on the show, and who's a great Catholic scientist. But that is interesting to ponder, because some of these theories, they involve a level of creativity and sophistication that maybe if you did destroy them, maybe they wouldn't necessarily come back. But I mean, that's another thing we could talk about with the science objection, that there are so many great Catholics who are also doing good scientific work, and Yaki would be one of those. Yeah,
absolutely. Or even, I heard years back that if we needed to rebuild a space shuttle, like I think there would be problems with it because the technology and the means to fabricate the things would be gone. So it's true even with science, science.
Yeah, it's hard to do. Why haven't we returned to the moon? It must be a very challenging thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're talking with master apologist himself, John DeRosa, about his new book, One Less God Than You. We'll be right back. We're going to be answering atheistic slogans. Stay tuned.
Hi, this is Jesse Romero from the Terry and Jesse Show, also from Jesus 911. Let's face it, we all need to use the internet, but we need screen accountability. Why? Pornography is a huge problem, especially on the internet. And every time we tap into the internet, we get bombarded with images and temptations that degrade our humanity. So we need Covenant Eyes to block these pornographic sites and advertisements from infiltrating our lives. Covenant Eyes helps us take custody of our eyes and custody of our intellect. So I recommend you go to covenanteyes.com and type in the promo code VMPR to support the network. Protect yourself and your family from the imminent threats on the internet. www.covenanteyes.com, code VMPR, live porn free. Thank you for listening to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Thank you. God bless you. Keep the faith.
This This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And here's an easy way to support us by going to smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center or Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And when you log in your Amazon account and you purchase products, a portion of it will go right back in supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And it doesn't cost you a dime. I want to thank you ahead of time because that supports us year-round. May God bless you and your family. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. We are chatting with our good friend, John DeRosa, about his upcoming book, One Less God Than You, put out by Catholic Answers Press. You can pre-order it, folks, and I recommend you do. In fact, John, this is one of those books that if I had the money, I would buy a copy for like every confirmation formation class, every RCIA, every youth group in the United States, because, man, this would be such a handy handbook to have on hand and even work with youth to kind of blow the cover off of a lot of these slogans.
No, I appreciate you saying that. No, I hope it serves that purpose, and I think maybe, and I'm thinking maybe even in homeschool cases or people in high school, believers who go off and want to be able to defend their faith well. It'd be nice to just have this as a little pocket guide, a first way to answer all these 20 objections. And then what I do is I provide references. So this is not the be all end all of every single conversation. This is a great book to get you started at answering 20 slogans. And then at the end of each chapter, I got some references if you want to go deeper into that topic.
Yeah, very good. Because, like I said, I'm kind of a classicaltheist.com junkie. I'm always watching your stuff. And I know a lot. But when you're actually on the spot and someone throws a slogan at you, you have all this information, right? And, how do you put it down to a nice, concise, edible chunk of data?
Right. Well, and
they
honestly,
respond.
Sometimes I feel like I'm always so mad because I'm like, 5 minutes after the conversation, I'm like, oh, I wish I could have said this, or I wish I could have said that. But it's almost like sometimes you get zapped in the moment and you forget everything. But that's why if you've done a little preparation in advance, let's say you have like a few standard questions, about say 4 or 5 big questions that you could ask in response to a lot of these slogans. And what Greg Kokel does well, and he's a Protestant Christian, but he has a great book on tactics, is he says the 3 fundamental questions that everyone should be able to ask is just when you hear a slogan, ask for clarification. What do you mean by that? Mm-hmm. And then you can always ask the person, well, hey, how did you come to that conclusion? Have them tell more your reasoning. And then the third thing is that we always want to try to get to is, well, have you ever considered this? That's the hardest step. That's offering something more that actually answers and maybe turns the tables a bit. But even if you can't get to that third step, everybody can do those first 2 steps. Like say, oh, you say you don't believe in God, you believe in science. Well, tell me, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Why can't science and God work together? Just start with those. Ask questions, have them answer it, and then go from there. And then if you can get to that third step once you've studied more, then maybe you lead someone into a further conversation. But everybody knows too, and I say this in the introduction, nobody converts to atheism or theism, to Christianity or another religion. Nobody converts like in an instant on the spot, unless there's some miraculous supernatural invention involved generally. This is going to take time, and you might be watering and tilling the soil or planting seeds in that garden that over time and multiple conversations, perhaps you point someone in the right direction, then they come to see, wow, all this time God was leading me by his grace, and I do believe it, and I want to become a Catholic Christian. But don't expect that. You can't go in there with those crazy expectations. That doesn't happen in 1 second. And just because it doesn't happen in 1 second doesn't mean the worldview is false. Okay, just because you can't convince someone that Einstein's relativity theory is true in 10 seconds, just because you can't explain it in 10 seconds, that doesn't mean it's false. It just means sometimes ideas are important and sophisticated and need some mulling over to really understand the evidence and the arguments.
Yeah, that's a great point, John, because I know, back in the 80s and 90s when fundamentalism was a big threat, the working premise underneath that was, if it's simple, it's true. Okay, if it's complex, then it's obviously false. And which in itself is kind of ridiculous if you think about it. But there is this inclination to think, well, if it's simple and I could grasp it immediately, then that must be the truth. Which, what other field of knowledge, would that be true in?
Exactly right. It's not true in science. It's not true in mathematics. Exactly. Nothing is exactly like that. But I can't tell you. There's the seed of a serious slogan, and I got a whole section on serious slogans, like the 4 big ones I call, that are a little bit, they start out as slogans, but there's actually some pretty serious arguments behind them. And I think the seed of things wanting to work quickly actually goes to this hiddenness objection, which is pretty popular. If you wanted to talk about that a little bit, but I titled that chapter,
Yeah,
If a
absolutely.
So say someone says to you this, well, okay, maybe you can't convince me in 10 seconds that God exists, but don't you think if a loving God existed, his presence would be much more obvious? Don't you think that that's true? If he really loves me and wants a relationship, that his presence would be much more obvious. And that's a pretty, you could put that in a quick, pithy way as a question, but it's actually a pretty deep argument. And there's been some atheist philosophers who have gone a long way with this, and they've done a lot of deep work. So what can we say in response to that on the spot? People might be like, I don't know. So here's some first questions you could ask. Again, you could ask them, well, how'd you come to that conclusion? Or tell me more about what you've studied. Have you always disbelieved in God? Did you always think God didn't exist? Or did you start off thinking that way and then change your mind? Tell me more about that. Try to gather some information on whether this person has examined the arguments. Maybe you could even ask them too. Well, you say that the evidence would be much more obvious. What evidence have you looked into? What's the best argument that you've heard for God's existence? And what do you think is wrong with it? Start out, those I call like stage setting questions, or just diagnostic. You're finding more information about how seriously this person has taken this objection and how much they've studied different arguments. So that's kind of like the stage 1 response. I call that opening response in the book. Oh, let me tell you this, sorry, and then I'll get to the main response. I run the chess club at my school. I started this like 2 years ago, but when I had to run the chess club, I know how to play chess, but I didn't really know much about it. And then my principal just asked me to start this chess club. So I was like, oh, shoot, what do I do? And my brother bought me this great book on like how to play chess and how to do this and that. And I loved it because it had a whole, bunch of chapters on opening responses. And then it had a whole nother section of the book on middle game responses. And I kind of modeled my chapters off of this book. So I give you the opening responses in the section, like some initial questions, but then we go to like the middle game examples, principles, and responses that you can make. So that's my opening so far for the hiddenness objection. Notice I haven't really given any answers. I've just asked questions, but then I give a little more of a targeted response in the middle game. So do you want me to get into that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. I actually, this one I came up with an acronym that'll be good for Catholic Christians. I think you can make about 6 points. I'm not going to give all 6 here. Well, if you want me to, I will, but I'll just give a couple of them. But the acronym to help you remember this on the spot is No Meat, NOMEAT. And as Catholics, hey, during Lent, we're used to not eating meat on Fridays. Maybe some of us do that year round, or perhaps you substitute, some other type of penance. But No Meat is our acronym. And then I just have 6 points that go with that you might pick 1 or 2 of these to help someone in the conversation. First point, what's the N stand for? N, I would say, stands for not as hidden as some make it sound. I would say God is not as hidden as some people make it sound. And the way I would try to introduce that point too is asking a question that I've said on the show before, but I'll say it again. And that's, if you're looking at the Mona Lisa, where is the painter? Hey, I got a weird question for you. Let me tell you this. If you're looking at the Mona Lisa, where's the painter? And this is kind of getting at the idea that the painter is not, another little character inside of the painting. It's not like, oh, well, if you look under the microscope and zoom in really far, or if you maybe like look at the outer edges, maybe around the border, you'll find the painter. No. The painter is the necessary creator of the painting itself, such that if there were no painter, there wouldn't be a painting. Similarly, with God and the God of classical theism in particular, we look at him as the necessary creator of all that exists. So some evidence that points to him would be the creation and beginning of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent life, the fact that contingent things exist at all, the fact that we are moral beings in the universe that can reason, and we have this faculty that seems to transcend material components. And by the way, I just listed like the seed of 5 arguments that I go into further depth in an appendix, because the book is not about giving all these arguments, but that's the seed of 5 arguments. What I would suggest you as a Catholic do in that case is say, well, I don't know if God's as hidden as some make it sound. I can think of at least 2 or 3 good pieces of evidence that point to God, and then you rattle off your own list. I kind of gave my mini list there. So that's the first point. He's not as hidden as some make it sound. Mm-hmm. Let me just give you 2 more. How about 2 more? And then if you want to get all 6, into the chapter, I go in more detail. Here's another point. People tend to assume that God being more obvious would lead to more proper relationships, or people engaging in proper relationships with him. But just because something is more obvious does not necessarily guarantee that more people would enter into a proper relationship with him. And to make this point, you could just ask a question like, I'll tell you what, I am very tempted by junk food, fast food, chips, desserts, stuff like that. I know that stuff is bad for me. I think a lot of people do. So to introduce this point, you could ask the question, hey, do you think sometimes people eat or do unhealthy things even though they know it's bad for them? Do you think anyone ever does that? And the idea is this: just because people know, and how about smoking too? A lot of people try to quit smoking. They know that that's bad for them. Just because people know, just because they have a fact in their mind or knowledge that, let's say, junk food is bad, or they shouldn't be smoking, or they should be exercising more, it doesn't automatically translate to the fact that they're going to act on that knowledge. So just because, let's say they want to design their own world where God comes down and manifests himself as a hologram to every person at night, just because, he made his existence more obvious in that manner, it wouldn't necessitate that more people enter into a proper relationship with him. And Dr. William Lane Craig points out, perhaps some people would resent it. Perhaps they would end up resenting this guy that literally is always breathing down their neck, and they feel like they don't have freedom to make their own choices and to live their own lives. So just because he's more obvious, it doesn't necessitate more proper relationship. Perhaps he's put that evidence at just the right level so that many people can come to know him. And then just a third point, I like this from Dr. Michael Ray's book on hiddenness. You might ask a person, well, let me ask you this. What do you have in mind when it comes to experiencing God? Do you think you've ever experienced God? When people say they experience God, what do you think they have in mind? And this is the E in the no meat acronym. The E stands for experiencing God doesn't require wild and crazy visions and voices. People kind of think like to have religious experience, you better be having wild and crazy visions and voices. But no, that's not how it works. You can experience God through ordinary phenomena with the right cognitive lens. And I go into some more detail about this with Ray's analysis, but how we think about a situation actually comes to bear on how we experience it. And I would argue just by seeking God, by reading the Bible, by committing to some quiet prayer time, by thinking about him throughout the day, by maybe trying to revise some of your moral decisions, you can actually experience God in the daily presence of life.
Yeah, beautiful. So we're chatting with Master Apologist John DeRosa about his upcoming book, One Less God Than You. More to come on the other side of the break, folks. Listening Hands on Apologetics.
Welcome, Daniel. You're on the line. What's on your mind, brother?
Hi, I just wanted to share a testimony about Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I had a buddy at work who, he's a lukewarm Catholic guy, and I wanted him to start listening to the Terry and Jesse show, so I kept telling him to download the app, and he kept putting me off. So one day, I grabbed his phone and I downloaded the app for him. I went on vacation, and I kept telling him to listen to it. He was kind of put me off. I came back from vacation. He comes to my cubicle, and he says to me, "Hey, man, I've been listening to Terry and Jesse's show, and it's great." And it's made a big impact in his life. The guy, he's going to weekly adoration a couple times a week. He goes to the Mass in the morning. Mm-hmm. He's an on-fire Catholic, and he promotes the Terry and Jesse show in the Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Daniel, what a testimony. And I want to encourage our listeners to get those cards by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and do what Daniel's doing. Go out and spread the faith by inviting people to listen to Virgin Most Powerful. Daniel, thanks for your testimony, brother. God love you.
You're welcome.
Leviticus 11:44 says, "Consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am holy." St. Vincent Pallotti said, "You must be holy in the way God asks you to be holy." God does not ask you to be a Trappist monk or a hermit. He wants you to sanctify the world and your everyday life. May God show us the path to holiness and help us to follow it all the days of our life.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Master Apologist John DeRosa about his upcoming book, soon to be released from Catholic Answers Press, One Less God Than You, that deals with all these popular atheistic slogans. John, you know, that was beautiful. You were putting on a clinic at last break. And I was just, during the break, I was just going through your table of contents, and you do a beautiful job because some of these are oldies. I mean, you even have one from Bertrand Russell. You have newfangled ones. I'm just curious, in terms of like your field research, how did you go about collecting these slogans?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's honestly the fun part of adding to it. Most of them originally just came from ones that I'd heard in conversation or by listening to Catholic Answers Live and Atheists Calling In, or by, going to that retreat. And I just kind of like looked around and saw what was common, or even in some debates, between new atheists, that they would bring up these different slogans. And then for other ones, I did try to peruse some popular blog posts, popular YouTube videos, things that were common and I saw coming up again and again. I would just kind of tuck that away and use again. But honestly, even this list of 20 could really grow to a lot. But I tended to stick with what was more popular, and then I would slate it in. I tried to make sure at least the big arguments against God's existence were represented. So things like hiddenness, the problem of evil, the idea that, atheists just lack a belief and it's on religious people to have the burden of proof. I tried to slate in all those big ideas that you're going to see again and again, but then there's also some popular ones that you'll just see flung around on the internet about slavery and Saudi Arabia and religion causing wars and violence. So it's a mix, but I went to some books, some things I've heard, and then other things from YouTube or blog posts, things that were popular.
Yeah, very good. And you did a great job selecting these because it really does cover the whole gamut. And if there isn't one represented here, there's probably one that's pretty close to it. And you
know what I do? In a couple times in the book, I ask people to contact me with either good questions that they come up with, because I have a few suggested questions that I think people should ask in conversation, and I get those from different people. But if you come up with your own good questions that you think are helpful, or your own powerful points, or maybe even your own slogans that you run into that you've never heard before, I have a little part in the book where I say, hey, contact me, let me know. I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to hear the good questions, new slogans, and then perhaps we can get an appendix or the next edition going, adding to this list.
Yeah, very good. Before I give you another one, really quick, I'd like your thoughts on, is it possible for theists to engage in sloganeering? Can you come up with, is that a legitimate way of arguing if you come up with a slogan except from a theistic point of view?
That's a great point, Gary. I'm so glad you bring that up, because I think all of us are prone to this. And it's always good when you see someone making a mistake and arguing, finding the fallacy, to ask, hey, wait a minute, am I doing this too? And to question it. And I think it's just because we tend to like the slogans on our side that, we might be more likely to give that as well. But I would say in general, a slogan is not a substitute for a substantive argument. So I'm trying to think, what would someone say who was giving a theistic slogan? They might say, well, hey, if there's no God, how did we all get here? And like, just like look around, like, isn't that so obvious? Or they might say something like, oh, well, I just looked at this beautiful flower the other day, and obviously God exists, or something like that. Like, maybe, and I'm not saying that these are not things that are important or that should be considered, but we shouldn't accept a slogan just because it's on our side.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I was thinking if we burned all the new atheist books, would anybody notice they're gone?
That's funny. We could take some of these and make like a reverse slogan with it. Yeah, exactly. That's great.
Another thing I really appreciate too, and I want to ask you a question along these lines, is that sometimes you could be so geared for, strictly speaking, pure theistic arguments, but many times atheistic slogans will kind of go into the realm of Christian apologetics, where it has to do with the Bible. And sometimes, you might be sharp on one area, not on the other. So let me give you, we'll throw out slogan 9. The God of the Bible is an evil maniac who commits atrocity after atrocity.
Yeah, so and I think I have at least 3 different slogans that deal with the Bible explicitly. Yep. So this will come up, and that's one of them. And I think the first step in those types of things is say, hey, okay, let's just get on the same page here for a second. You have to admit, I'm happy to engage this, but even if this turns out to be correct, it wouldn't show atheism is true, right? It wouldn't show that there's no God. Perhaps it would just show, like, get that question on the table. Like, do you agree with that? Like, this wouldn't show that God doesn't exist, because that really should get put on the table, because at the most, it might show that the Bible has some mistakes in it, or that people have misunderstood it. And of course, we don't believe that as Catholic Christians. I'm just saying, for the purpose of argument, you can get it on the table that this doesn't show that atheism is true. Because a lot of times when people want to use this as a quick slogan on the internet, they're like, oh, I got these 3 criticisms of the Bible, I just trot these out and boom, therefore atheism is true. And it doesn't work like that. So I'd like to get that question on the table first. Well, this wouldn't show atheism is true, right? Secondly, got to ask them for more details. Got to gather some information. Don't just start spewing stuff or trying to memorize points like, oh, one time I read this book, this happened. No. What specifically do you have in mind? Like, hey, okay, you're asserting that God of the Bible is an evil maniac. Can you tell me more? Like, what specifically do you have in mind? And let them answer. You could probably tell me, Gary, 2 of the common things. Do you know what do you think they're going to say? I have one here that I have in mind, but I'm curious. What do you think they would say to that? What specifically do you have in mind?
Yeah.
What do you think? I'm curious. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that they wouldn't know what to say, to tell you the truth.
Well, that's the thing. Some may not have any citation, and that's where you kind of differentiate. Some may not have studied the issue. They're just parroting what somebody else said. But I think we've got to give them some credit. I think some of them definitely do this and know some citations. A common one is 1 Samuel 15:3. 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 3. It's the ordering of God to the God commanding the Israelites to wipe out the Canaanites, to destroy the Canaanites. And he says, to kill every man, woman, and child, and oxen, and so forth. And it's a very intense language. So I would say make them come up with that citation, but some of them may have said they didn't have that citation. Okay, let's take a step back then. So how do we answer that? How do we look at that? I think we got to make a few general points, and then maybe we can comment on that specific passage. And people have done this really at length, and they've done a really good job actually showing that, it's not like these Canaanites were just this rosy group of people that were picture perfect and just hanging out, and then all of a sudden God destroyed them. No, they were doing some heinous, absolutely abominable stuff. But here's what I would make as a first general point. As believers in God, in particular as classical theists, we have to say, God is the author and creator of all life, and he has a unique authority over human beings to give and take life as he sees fit. So in commanding the Israelites to conquer the Canaanites, what he's really doing, he's deputizing the Israelites as instruments of his judgment. The Israelites, what people are afraid, they're afraid of a couple things. But first, they're afraid that the Israelites, just wanted to do this on their own. And they just were bloodthirsty and said, oh, we're just going to go kill everyone. And then they did it. And then, therefore, Christians are justifying that. That's actually not what we're saying. We're saying that God, in his revelation to the Israelites, actually commanded them as his instruments to execute this judgment. But that does not mean that other people have the authority to just kill innocent people or to kill guilty people even. God doesn't just give this authority to people at random. That's not how it works. What's going on there is God using Israelites as his instruments to exercise judgment. And we say, yes, God is the transcendent creator. He does have that right over people. And whether, let's be honest here, whether he permits someone to live a long life and then perhaps pass away with a heart attack, or whether he permits someone to get cancer when they're younger and die, God is still sovereign over all of that. There's no one at the time of their death that escapes, God's providential plan. So whether someone dies, in old age, or whether they're, the victim of this Israelite command, that's still God in control of all of it. So that's one of the things I would say. God has a special and unique authority that transcends the authority of creatures. But that's not going to satisfy a lot of people. So you got to add this second point. Here's what people are also worried about. They're worried about that there were just these innocent people hanging out there, and they got crushed in this victory of the Israelites, and all the innocent people got swept up. Well, first of all, that's assuming that they're innocent. We think that a lot of those people were really engaged in various crimes, and pretty severe ones. But let's just make this point in the Catholic tradition. God's judgment will be perfect, and there will be no mistakes. He offers all men sufficient grace to be saved, and no one is going to be lost by a historical, geographical, or battle accident. Okay, people are worried like these people are just going to get killed and they never had a chance to believe in God. No. That's not how it works. If they responded to God in a positive way by his grace, we know the example of Rahab, right? We have the example of Rahab. I know that's a little different than the context of wiping out the Canaanites, but Rahab was not an Israelite. She was living among non-Israelites, yet she somehow was responding to God's grace in a positive way. Because that can happen and God's judgment will be perfect, we can be confident that even if the God of the Bible commands these battles and so forth and the Israelites to reclaim the land, no innocent people are going to be swept away by an accident. And then here's the third. So those are the first 2 points. One, God's creator and author of life. He's transcendent and he has unique authority. Second point, his judgment will be perfect. There will be no mistakes. Innocent people aren't just getting creamed for no reason. And then third, I would say this, and a lot of people have argued this as well, more recent commentators, maybe the commands weren't as they're literally we literally read them today, as these commands to wipe out every man, woman, child, oxen. Maybe some of those commands were non-literal and reflect common warfare rhetoric of the day. So maybe what's really being asserted by the sacred author is the command for Israelites to drive the Canaanites out of the land, to reclaim their land, to retake their cities, and to drive them out, not to literally crush everything. It's kind of like a rah-rah warfare battle cry, maybe like a coach in halftime would speak to his team. This could be something like that going on in the biblical text. So that's not a definite answer, but those are some points that I would help to make to answer this slogan.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Yeah, you definitely cover all the bases, even within a couple of minutes. In fact, the Canaanites tend to reappear in Scripture, which is odd if they're completely wiped out.
Right. And let me give you this. As a classical theist, we know Scripture says God can change his mind. God relented. God did this. God did that. And guess what? As classical theists, we don't take that language ultra literally, that God is physically changing his mind. We have a way of interpreting that fits with what we know about God and the Scriptures understanding it. So there is basis for understanding some texts in the Old Testament non-literally. So maybe that's just another point I would make.
That's awesome. No, perfect. I hear the music coming up. Man, I can't believe the hour's flowing, John. Where can people go, again, to get all the great stuff that you produce?
For this book, classicaltheism.com/new book. But in general, just classicaltheism.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a ton of fun.
Been a blast.
All right. John DeRosa, everybody. Yeah, classicaltheism.com. Check it out. Man, it's already time to shut down the Midwest Command Center, turn off the Dojo light. Thank you so much for listening. Coming up next, High Impact Catholic Talk on Matt, your Terry and Jesse show. Everybody have a great day. God willing, we'll talk again tomorrow.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church, so I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.